The man was shot multiple times in the back, and was kicked towards the truck by someone in the car, but despite suffering such fatal injuries, he still didn't die. Clearly, this man possessed an immortal body. He was not afraid of any external attacks at all, because he was a soul brought to the human world by a crow. The man was undying, and his goal was to bring back his beloved. The latest fantasy action movie is The Crow. One ordinary night, a girl named Shelly received a call from her friend Zadi. Zadi sent a video about a client. The content in the video was enough to ruin the other person's reputation. Zadi wanted to use the video to protect herself. Realizing she was being targeted, she sent the video to Shelly, and warned her to be careful. As Zadi spoke, she opened the door to her rented room. She saw an elegant Helen sitting inside the room. Zadi tried to run, but was blocked by the bodyguard. Helen took her phone, and looked through her chat history. Then she instructed the bodyguard to inject Zadi with a sedative. Shelly felt uneasy when the call suddenly dropped. She first called her friend Dom, arranging to meet at Zadi's house. As soon as Shelly stepped out, she realized she was being followed. Shelly deliberately bumped into two police officers ahead, causing the contraband in her bag to scatter. The police immediately arrested Shelly, but because of her young age, the police sent her to a rehabilitation center for detox. It was there that Shelly met Eric. At the same time, at a luxurious gala, business tycoon Roig was talking to Mary, until Helen came over to call Roig away. The two went down to the basement together. Zadi had just awakened from the sedative, and the subject of her video was Roig. The man demanded to know where Shelly was. Of course, Zadi had no idea where her friend was. Even if she did, she wouldn't say. Roig stated that he had survived for centuries, and had killed hundreds of innocents. They loved the souls of the innocent, so go to hell. Zadi. Roig came closer after finishing his words. In the next second, Zadi's pupils turned white. Then she picked up the knife from the ground, and stabbed her neck 3 times. Zadi collapsed to the ground. Roig sliced his palm to cover her wound, as if he were savoring her soul. The scene shifted back to the rehabilitation center. Shelly quickly discovered that people here had been bullying Eric, so she approached him during lunch to strike up a conversation. In fact, there was a rule in the rehab center that opposite sexes couldn't sit together, but Shelly ignored those rules. She chatted happily with Eric. They were uncontrollably drawn to each other, but their peaceful life was soon shattered. Shelly's mother surprisingly showed up at the rehab center with Helen. Shelly was shocked to hear about the visit. According to her, no one should know she was there. Hearing this, Eric offered to go check it out, but in his eyes, Helen looked like a lawyer. But the moment Shelly saw Helen, she knew they were sent by Roig. Shelly panicked and repeatedly muttered, "It will be terrible if I get caught." Fortunately, Eric knew an escape route. He took Shelly to the laundry room. As long as they removed the electronic shackles and climbed onto the washing machine, they could escape through the vent above. Although Eric knew about this exit, he had never had the courage to go through it. Now, Shelly's presence gave him the courage. By the time Helen came looking for them, the two had already escaped. Shelly took Eric to a friend's place, where the friend was in Antigua, and wouldn't be back for a while. Shelly knew that involving Eric might put him in danger too, but Eric was willing to stay by Shelly's side. In the days that followed, their relationship grew intimate. They experienced a real romantic period together. During this time, they also moved to a new place. Eric set the lyrics he had written in the rehab center to music. They recorded songs together in a rundown studio. He quickly discovered that Shelly had a remarkable talent for music, but Shelly was resistant to it. Because the piano reminded her of Roig, she would think of the dark shadow that followed her. The most painful part was that she couldn't tell Eric. Shelly feared that he would leave if he knew the truth. That day, the two were having drinks at a bar. Suddenly, their friend Dom came over. He told Shelly that Zadi was dead. "They will find us. You need to leave town now." Shelly, upon hearing this, pulled Eric out of the bar. They planned to pack their bags and escape. After Eric locked the door and entered the living room, he saw Shelly with a plastic bag covering her head. Just then, he was also subdued by the bodyguards. Eric watched helplessly as Shelly died through the plastic bag. He slowly began to lose his breath as well. In a daze, it felt as if he had fallen into the deep sea. Eric saw Shelly ahead and desperately swam towards her, but his survival instincts pushed Eric to the surface. He had no idea where this place was. He could only follow a man who was walking his dog to the platform. Everywhere were black crows. Legend has it that these birds can guide souls across the realm of the living and the dead, helping lost spirits find their way.
The crow will guide you to put the wrong things right.
What do you mean?
Eric stubbornly believed that this was just a nightmare. The man came in front of him and coldly said, "If it's a dream, then wake up." As soon as he finished speaking, Eric fell into the water. When he woke up again, he found himself back at home, but Shelly had already vanished. As Eric held her clothes, feeling heartbroken, a police officer bribed by Helen appeared. Eric quickly hid in the shadows, but the alert officer sensed that someone was inside the house. Hearing this, Eric stopped hiding, unaware that the officer had been bribed. Eric tried to explain the situation, but the officer immediately opened fire. Strangely, after Eric was shot, he did not die. He grabbed a dagger and got up to lunge at the officer. Although Eric was no match for the officer in combat and was stabbed several times, but no matter what, Eric couldn't die. Using this fact, he successfully killed the officer. Moreover, the wounds on Eric's body quickly healed. Eric was very confused. He ran out the door, with a crow following him the entire way. He reached the edge of a bridge, and suddenly saw Shelly ahead. She glanced at him, and then jumped into the water. Eric followed and jumped in after her. He woke up again, and found himself back at the station. The man stood aside, and explained that both Shelly and Eric were actually dead. Eric was confused and asked, "Since we are both dead, why isn't Shelly at this station?" The man explained, "She's going to a much worse place. The one who killed you shouldn't be in your world. He made a deal with a demon, sending innocents to hell in exchange for eternal life. This violated the balance between the two worlds." The man told Eric that as long as he killed them, he could get Shelly back and regain his old life, but the condition was that Eric must ensure the purity of his love. Otherwise, his ability to be undying would vanish. After saying this, the man sent Eric back to the living world. Eric immediately went to find a tattoo artist, where he got a gun and several bullets. Meanwhile, Shelly's funeral was taking place. Her mother appeared to be very wealthy. Eric followed Shelly's mother back to the apartment, where everything the woman had was bought, at the cost of her daughter. Eric asked her who the person was that came to the rehab center with her that day. "I will kill them all, and that will bring Shelly back." Of course, normal people couldn't understand Eric's words, and didn't believe he could take down Roig. Eric couldn't ask anything further, and went to check Shelly's bedroom by himself. Eric discovered many scratches on the floor in front of the closet. He moved the closet aside, and found a hidden compartment. Inside the compartment were photos of Shelly, Zadi, and others, and at the bottom, there was an employee badge from an art gallery. Eric immediately headed to the address on the badge. A black crow circled above his head. On his way, Eric saw the bodyguard from that day. He pulled out his gun, opened the car door, and sat in the back seat. Then Eric demanded to know who the bodyguard was working for. Just as he found a lead, it suddenly cut off, and Eric felt frustrated. The bodyguard's phone in his pocket beeped with a notification, showing 2 messages from Marion. That is, a message from Helen, saying she had found Dom, and instructed the bodyguard to act immediately. At that moment, Marion happened to pass by. Eric quickly blocked their car, and opened fire. Marion's car came crashing straight at him. Eric smashed the glass, and entered the vehicle. He struggled with Hunter, who was in the passenger seat, and killed the driver. The car went out of control like a runaway horse, crashing around in the tunnel. Eric tried to get closer to Marion, but he was entangled by a bodyguard. Eric was shot multiple times in the back, and in his desperate struggle, he accidentally opened the car door. The bodyguard kicked Eric out, and he was caught under an oncoming truck. Although Eric was undying, he still felt pain. Eric slowly got up, gritting his teeth as he realigned the broken bones. Meanwhile, Roig and Mary arrived at Shelly's mother's place. Roig told Mary to wait in the car, while he went upstairs to talk to Shelly's mother. Clearly, he had heard about Eric's resurrection, and that he had been here, so Roig wanted to know what that man was really after. Shelly's mother confessed that Eric said if they killed them, he could bring Shelly back to life. Roig's expression changed slightly at this, and he didn't want to continue watching Shelly's mother cry. "You exchanged your daughter for a life of wealth, and now you're pretending to be heartbroken." Roig used his magic to hypnotize Shelly's mother, who instantly fell down the stairs and died. Immediately afterward, Roig contacted Marion and said that Eric had been sent back from the underworld. He possesses the power to escape death within him. Roig instructed Marion to capture him. At that moment, Eric found Dom. He didn't know that Dom was Shelly's friend. Eric thought that Dom had brought bad people to find them. Dom quickly explained, "There's a guy named Vincent Roig who's hunting Shelly. I went to the bar just to warn you to run." Having seen Roig's supernatural abilities, Dom told Eric to find Shelly's phone. "As long as you watch the video inside, you'll understand everything." Hearing this, Eric warned Dom to escape quickly. Their location had been compromised. Late at night, Eric returned to the mansion where he used to live. Memories of his time with Shelly flashed back to him. Eric moved the closet aside and found the wooden box where Shelly hid her things. Inside the box was Shelly's phone. Eric opened the video sent by Zadi, and on the screen, several young men and women were gathered in Roig's mansion. A man approached Shelly, who was playing the piano, said a few words, and she stood up and stabbed her companion to death. Then she hid in Roig's embrace. Eric didn't know that Shelly had been hypnotized when she killed, and he found it hard to accept. Unsure of what to do, Eric could only go to his tattoo artist friend to talk.
Why didn't you just fucking tell me? If she did tell you, could you still love her?
As soon as he finished speaking, an uninvited guest showed up. The bodyguard from last time brought 2 accomplices. The bodyguard quickly subdued Eric and shot the tattoo artist. Eric struggled desperately to break free, while Hunter aimed his gun at him. This time, Eric actually died. He staggered back and fell into the bathtub. The next second, he found himself back at the death transit station. The man saw Eric's state and knew that Eric's love for Shelly was no longer pure and steadfast. Since Eric had wasted the opportunity given by God, the man was unwilling to say more. Suddenly, Eric called out to him, saying he was willing to exchange his soul for Shelly's. No matter how dark the place she was going to, Eric was willing to bear everything for Shelly, though his love was mixed with doubt and distrust. But he truly loved Shelly. Hearing this, the man had to remind Eric, "In that case, you two can never be together." Eric, upon hearing this, did not back down. In the next second, a flock of crows flew around them, and one of them knocked Eric down. The man cut both of their palms, and then clasped them together. He told Eric, "From now on, there is no turning back for you." He recited a spell.
"With this black blood, you will move between worlds, just like them.
Go for the wrong things right."
This time, Eric woke up from the bathtub with a brand new power. He took care of Hunter, and then turned to shoot the bodyguard and his accomplice. Eric bludgeoned them to death with the gun stock. Then, he rummaged through the bodyguard's phone. Eric saw that the man had arranged to meet Marion at the opera house in 2 hours. Eric picked up the gun to finish his tattoo, and then mixed dye to apply some makeup. He changed into new clothes, and grabbed a knife, then headed to the opera house 2 hours later. Marion, Roig, and the others were enjoying the opera, while Eric, accompanied by a powerful and beautiful tenor, unleashed a bloody massacre. The 2 bodyguards spotted him, and gestured to ambush Eric, but Eric couldn't die again. No matter how hard the bodyguards tried to attack and organize their tactics, they were helpless against the undying man. Marion quickly received the news that Eric had broken in. She sent all her bodyguards to surround him. Eric fought his way through and climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor. Eric advanced, ignoring the bullets, but the intense firepower forced him to his knees. The bodyguards thought he was finally dead, but Eric raised his knife and stabbed one of them to death. The blood stained the theater's tiles, and the dull thud of the knife hitting bone combined with gunfire formed the accompaniment to the opera. The music reached its climax, and then slowly descended, and at the moment the audience erupted into applause. Eric had also finished off all the obstacles in his way. Roig showed no mercy, and abandoned Marion. The last personal secretary blocked the hallway. Quickly realizing he couldn't kill Eric, he pointed the gun at his own head. Eric stepped forward and chopped off his arm, then decapitated the secretary. Eric, filled with murderous intent, walked up to Marion and demanded to know where Roig was.
His country's dead. Healer's man.
Upon hearing this, Eric decapitated Marion. Then he walked onto the stage, and threw the 2 heads into the audience. The crowd gasped and wailed. Eric picked up the bouquet on the ground, which were Shelly's favorite lilies. He drove to the familiar bridge. After placing the flowers, Eric headed to Hillcrest Manor. Eric searched through the enormous mansion, and eventually found Royg's room. Eric immediately held the knife to Royg's neck. Royg deliberately cut his palm and said, "I'm just an ordinary old man. He has blood and flesh. He bleeds and can die, completely unlike you, and Shelly's soul has already gone to hell. No matter how you try, you can't bring her back." After saying this, Royg stabbed the knife into Eric's chest. "Look at yourself now. You can't feel anything. How can you have love in your heart? It's clearly hate that drives you to find me." Taking advantage of Eric's distraction, Royg suddenly leaned in and began to chant a spell. Black blood surged from Eric's chest. As memories of his brief love with Shelly replayed in his mind, he suddenly snapped back to reality, grabbed Royg, and slammed into the window. Both of them fell into the transit station together.
What is this place?
This is the place where it all ends. Where you pay for what you did to her.
There was an unknown object wriggling beneath Royg's feet, but he felt no fear. Instead, he found Eric's desperate struggle for a woman quite ridiculous. These words completely enraged Eric, who then pinned Royg in the puddle, and began to beat him savagely. Then he forced Royg's head underwater. At that moment, a black hand reached out from behind. Royg was ensnared, with dark bones tightening around him. They dragged Royg down into the abyss, accepting his filthy soul. Meanwhile, Shelly, who had been sleeping at the bottom of the water, slowly rose and finally returned to the surface. Eric pulled his beloved woman out, but unfortunately, they were about to be separated just as they met. After all, Eric had sacrificed his soul, and had no chance of regaining life. In the end, Shelly woke up with the man's help, and turned to look at Eric beside her. He had already become a cold, hard corpse, but they believed that one day, their souls would find each other again. At that time, Eric would regain the feeling of love. The film ends here. This film is adapted from the comic of the same name. It has previously been brought to the big screen. The lead was then played by Brandon Lee, the son of Bruce Lee. Unexpectedly, it has been remade many years later. In the original comic, the Crow is a remorseful anti-hero character, very cult-like and dark. The male lead, Bill Skarsgård, seems to be born for such cult films. His demeanor fits the character perfectly. The massacre in the opera house is the climax of the film. The girl's inclusion was also a pleasant surprise. Unfortunately, compared to the previous works or the original comic, the emotional buildup between the leads is too weak. This causes the male lead's actions to appear as if he's driven by infatuation. He has no normal emotional transition, making his revenge motives seem ridiculous. However, the fight scenes and the aesthetics of violence are still worth watching.